The tent was cold, even with the brazier burning in the corner. Wind howled outside like a warning. Robb Stark sat alone at the war table, his fists clenched over a rolled-up raven scroll. The ink was still fresh. It came from King's Landing, delivered by a nervous crow with shaking wings, as if the bird itself sensed the weight of the message it carried. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, even though she was miles away, imprisoned in her own shame after releasing Jaime Lannister without his permission. "It's a mother's heart that acts, Robb," she'd pleaded before he banished her to her chambers. But this wasn't just about heart. This was about war. About banners. About honor. The scroll was blunt: trade Jaime Lannister for Sansa and Arya. A fair exchange. He should have said yes. Every lord in his camp whispered it like a prayer. Even Lord Bolton, ever the quiet observer, had said, "It's not weakness to value family. It's wisdom." But Robb Stark, the young wolf, didn't nod. He didn't answer. He just stared at the flames, jaw tight, remembering the last time he saw his sisters. Sansa, a lady in her pale blue gown, dreaming of songs and nights. Arya, wild-haired and untamed, always chasing cats or carrying a wooden sword. He had failed them already by riding south. Now they were hostages in a city ruled by lions, surrounded by serpents. But the man they wanted in return, Jaime Lannister, was not just a prisoner. He was the Kingslayer. A knight who killed his own king. A golden-haired symbol of everything House Stark stood against. And most of all, the only leverage Robb had. "Release him," he murmured bitterly, as if testing the words on his tongue. They tasted like betrayal. He thought of his father. Eddard Stark would have done the honorable thing. But what was honor, when your sisters were prisoners? What was honor when Winterfell lay in ashes and Theon Greyjoy wore a smirk? Outside, grey wind growled low. The dire wolf sensed something. A presence. A decision. Catelyn had told him once, when he was a boy, that leadership meant loneliness. Back then, he'd laughed and said he'd never be lonely, not with Jon, Theon, Arya, and Robb all riding side by side. He was wrong. In the silence of that tent, with only a wolf and the sound of distant swords clashing in practice yards, Robb made his decision. He would not trade Jaime. Not for Sansa. Not even for Arya. Not because he didn't love them, gods knew he'd give anything to hold them again. But the war was bigger now. The realm was watching. If he traded the Kingslayer, the realm would call him weak. And worse, the men who followed him would begin to doubt. And if they doubted, they would leave. And if they left, the North would fall. He stood and walked to the fire, letting the scroll fall into it. The parchment twisted and blackened, words eaten by flame. Just like the peace it offered. He watched it burn. Behind him, footsteps approached. "Your Grace," came a soft voice. It was Talisa, the healer girl he had grown too fond of. Her eyes searched his face, reading the storm behind his calm. "You read the message?" He nodded. "And?" she asked gently. "I made my choice." She looked at him, and her voice, usually so soft and soothing, turned quiet with hurt. "Even if it means your sisters may die?" His voice didn't waver. "Yes." Outside, thunder cracked across the sky. A storm was coming, both from the heavens and within his own camp. But Robb Stark, the boy who had become a king, stood firm. He would not trade the Kingslayer. And in that one decision, 1,000 fates began to unravel. The news spread through the northern camp like wildfire: Robb Stark refused the trade. Jaime Lannister would remain a prisoner. And his sisters, well, nobody knew what would happen to them now. Ser Edmure Tully, Robb's uncle, stormed into the war tent without announcement. His face was red with frustration, and his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "Seven hells, Robb," he barked. "Do you know what you've done?" Robb didn't flinch. I did what a king must. You let your pride speak louder than reason, Edmure snapped. Your sisters are hostages, Robb cut in sharply. If I give up Jaime, I lose our only leverage. Then what stops the Lannisters from killing them anyway? Edmure shook his head. So we wait. Wait for their heads to arrive in a box like your father's. The mention of Ned Stark's death hit like a punch to the chest. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken pain. Robb closed his eyes for a moment, then said, quieter, if I show weakness, we lose the war. But outside the tent, his men were already whispering. Some spoke of Robb's honor. Others of his stubbornness. Lord Karstark had gone silent, his face grim as a frozen lake. He had lost 2 sons fighting the Lannisters, and now, he watched the Kingslayer walk free every day, eat northern bread, and sleep in a guarded tent while his sons rotted in the earth. That night, at the evening fire, Lord Karstark didn't join the table. Instead, he gathered a few of his trusted men and sat in the dark, sharpening his blade slowly, eyes burning. First the boy king marries a foreigner, he muttered, now he lets his sisters rot in the capital to keep Jaime alive. Tell me, what Northman still remembers vengeance? His men didn't speak. But their silence was agreement enough. Inside Robb's tent, Talisa tried once more. She approached gently, placing a hand on his arm. Robb, she said softly, your men are losing faith. They see you holding the Kingslayer as a trophy, not a threat. And they ask themselves, what's the point? He looked at her, pain showing behind his tired eyes. What would you have me do? She hesitated. I don't know. I fear you're becoming a king no one understands. He pulled away. A king doesn't need to be understood, Talisa. He needs to win. Outside, thunder rolled again. The sky over the twins was turning black, and not just with weather. Trouble brewed from within. At midnight, a commotion broke out near the prisoner's tent. Guards shouting. Blades drawn. Robb rushed out with grey wind at his side, heart racing. By the time he reached the tent, it was too late. Jaime Lannister lay in the mud, face bleeding but alive. 2 Karstark men lay dead beside him, one with his throat ripped open, the other still gasping through a chest wound. And Lord Karstark stood there, sword dripping, breathing hard. I should have finished it, he snarled. I should have killed the bastard. Robb stepped between them, sword half drawn. You defied my orders, Rickard. They killed my sons. Karstark spat. And you coddle him like he's some bloody heir to the north. You'll answer for this, Robb growled. I already have, Karstark sneered. With blood. There was no council. No debate. Karstark was placed under arrest. But his men didn't go quietly. Many left the camp by morning, banners torn down, loyalty shattered. And all the while, Jaime sat in his cell with that smug Lannister smirk, even through bruises and blood. You should have let me die, Stark, he said one evening. At least then your kingdom might have stayed whole. Robb said nothing. But he knew. Deep down, he knew. With every passing day, the price of his decision grew heavier. And his sisters? He hadn't heard from them in weeks. He could only pray they were still alive. Morning mist clung low to the earth, wrapping the northern camp in a blanket of grey silence. What few men remained loyal to Robb Stark walked quietly, heads down, avoiding one another's gaze. The air held a strange heaviness, not from defeat, but from doubt. It crept like mold through the tents, infecting every corner of their cause. Robb stood outside his command tent, eyes fixed on the distant horizon. The Karstarks had left in the night. Over 300 swords gone, banners rolled and loyalty withdrawn. His war host was bleeding, not from battle, but from within. The wind carried with it a whisper of things cracking apart. He knew the cost of Lord Karstark's execution. He had ordered it himself, after a brief trial, in front of every major house in the camp. There was no joy in it, only necessity. Rickard had taken justice into his own hands. Robb had to show the realm that no one, not even a lord of the north, was above the king's justice. But now, those same lords eyed him with quiet resentment. They didn't say it aloud, but it showed, in the way they spoke less, drank more, and planned behind closed tent flaps. Even Talisa had grown distant. That night, she sat across from him, her face dimly lit by the fire between them. Her eyes no longer held softness, only concern, sharpened like a blade. "You're bleeding, Robb," she said quietly. He frowned. "I'm not wounded." "You are. Just not where it shows." He said nothing. What could he say? That he was surrounded by ghosts. That every decision he made seemed to cost him another piece of himself. She leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you lose the North's trust, you lose everything. No war. No kingdom. No future." Robb clenched his jaw. "Then what would you have me do? Send Jaime back to Cersei with a bow and a kiss? What would that make me, Talisa? A king? Or a beggar?" Talisa flinched, not at his words, but at the anger behind them. "I'd rather be a beggar with sisters than a king with regrets." The words hung heavy between them. And for the first time, Robb looked away. In King's Landing, another storm brewed. Word of Robb's refusal had reached the Lannisters, and Cersei's rage was fire enough to burn the Red Keep to the ground. She had counted on the trade. She had prepared for it. Sansa had even been dressed like a queen-in-waiting the day the Raven arrived. But no exchange came. Instead, Jaime remained in chains, and Cersei's fury turned inward. "Send a message," she ordered to her council, voice cold as a dagger. "One they'll understand." 2 days later, a raven left the capital. No scroll. No writing. Just a package. When it arrived at Robb's camp, the maester unwrapped it carefully, hands trembling. Inside was a lock of red-brown hair, tangled and bloodied. Arya's hair. Or so they thought. Robb stared at it for a long time. It might have been hers. The color was right. The length. But Arya was gone, lost, rumored dead, or hidden among the chaos. It could have been a trick. Or it could have been a message. "Next time, it won't just be hair," the implied warning rang in his ears. He didn't show the others. Not even Talisa. He tucked it away in a leather pouch, close to his chest. But the weight of it, it was unbearable. And still, he didn't trade Jaime. Maybe it was pride now. Or maybe something worse, fear of being seen as weak. The boy who let a golden lion walk free while the North bled. But as night fell again, Robb sat alone by the fire, grey wind at his side, and whispered, "Tell me I'm not wrong." The wolf raised its head, ears flicking, but gave no answer. No one did any more. And far away, in a brothel in Flea Bottom, Arya Stark, dirty, disguised, and still breathing, coughed through the smoke of the fire she had just set. She was very much alive. But no raven would carry that truth to Robb Stark any time soon. The river outside the camp ran slow and silent, like the breath of a dying god. Leaves had begun to brown, and the wind had taken on the chill of the coming frost. Robb Stark watched the water, his reflection broken by the current. A king's face, young, tired, and harder than it had ever been back in Winterfell. Behind him, the banners still flew. The direwolf of House Stark snapped in the breeze. But the men beneath it, their loyalty had grown cold. Robb had hoped time would steady things. That after executing Karstark and refusing the Lannister trade, his men would settle, refocus, and fall back into line. But time did the opposite. Time sharpened anger. Time widened cracks. Even Lord Greatjon Umber, once the loudest voice of loyalty, had grown quiet. He barely shared a drink now. Barely looked Robb in the eye. In his private war councils, only a few voices remained firm, Ser Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, and the ever-calculating Roose Bolton, who said little but always seemed to watch too much. It was Bolton who brought the next piece of news. He entered Robb's tent quietly, holding a scroll in one gloved hand. From the twins, he said calmly. Lord Walder Frey has heard of your marriage. Robb's hand froze mid-motion. He'd been adjusting his sword belt, but now his fingers curled tight. What does he say? Bolton handed over the parchment. He says nothing. But silence from Lord Frey is a message in itself. Robb unfolded it. No threats. No insults. Just a list of names, Frey daughters, Frey sons, Frey bannermen who'd pledged to Robb on the condition of a marriage alliance. And at the bottom, in red ink, promises mean little when oaths are broken. Talisa stood behind him, quiet. She knew this day would come. She had never asked for a crown or a title. She had only loved him. And he had loved her, enough to break a pact with the most prideful man in the Riverlands. Robb set the scroll down. We'll send an apology. A gift. Horses. Gold. Whatever it takes. Roose Bolton tilted his head. And your head, will that be part of the gift? Robb's temper flared, but Bolton remained stone-faced. No gift will heal insult, Bolton continued. You've offended Lord Walder, and his pride is only matched by his pettiness. You should prepare for consequence. Robb looked away. Later that evening, Talisa approached him in their tent, her face pale from the cold. You regret marrying me, she said. No, he replied instantly. I regret everything but that. She smiled sadly. Then you'll lose more. That night, a second raven came. This one from the east. From the Vale. Robb opened it with hope, perhaps the Arryns would now rise to support him. But it was not an offer of swords. It was a warning. Lysa Arryn sends no troops. But beware, spies move through the Riverlands, and not all of them wear Lannister colors. Robb frowned. Spies? The Blackfish stepped forward. There've been whispers. Men in camp saying the king's gone mad. That you've lost your way. That you refuse to save your sisters because you think war is more important. Robb turned sharply. Do you believe that? The Blackfish didn't answer. But someone else did. Do you? It was Talisa. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. Robb didn't reply. He couldn't. Because a part of him wasn't sure anymore. Was this still about saving the North? Or was it just about proving he was his father's son, honorable, stubborn, doomed? Later, while the camp slept, he sat alone by the fire, reading the lock of hair again. Turning it over and over in his hands. Arya, was she even still alive? And Sansa? Was she still a pawn in King's Landing, smiling for monsters? He had failed them. No matter what face he showed in public, king, commander, wolf, the truth gnawed inside him. He had failed them. And in King's Landing, Cersei Lannister sipped her wine by candlelight, watching Sansa kneel before a dinner table, her hands trembling as she poured wine for Joffrey. You'll thank me one day, Cersei said with a smirk. Your brother chose war over you. But we chose manners. Sansa said nothing. But in her eyes, a quiet storm gathered. Back in the north, Robb burned the lock of hair in the fire. If they were going to kill his sisters, he'd make them choke on it. But somewhere deep inside, even as the flames rose, he couldn't silence the whisper. You could have traded. You could have saved them. Rain fell hard that night, drumming against canvas and steel like a warning from the gods. The camp was soaked in silence, save for the sound of wet boots in mud and horses snorting uneasily. It was the kind of night where secrets felt heavier, and loyalty seemed like a flickering candle in a storm. Robb stood under the open sky, letting the rain wash over his face. He wasn't praying. He had stopped praying weeks ago. The old gods had gone quiet. Or maybe they were never listening. Behind him, Talisa stood in the tent doorway, arms wrapped around herself. She hadn't spoken much since the last raven arrived. It had been another warning, this time from a bannerman near Harrenhal. Bolton's men speak more to the Lannisters than to their own. Robb didn't want to believe it. Roose Bolton had stood by him through thick and thin. But even a loyal man could be broken by ambition. Or by the slow rot of a cause falling apart. I saw Roose's squire passing notes, Grey Wind's handler had whispered to him that morning. The boy, quiet one, pale as a corpse, he rides alone too often. Vanishes at night. Robb had sent riders to follow the squire, but they found nothing. Just muddy tracks that disappeared into the woods. No proof. Only suspicion. And suspicion was poison in war. Later that day, Ser Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, returned from a scouting mission with darker news. Lannister riders sighted near Riverrun, he reported. But they didn't attack. Just watched. Like they were waiting. Waiting for what? Robb asked. For you to fall apart, Brynden replied grimly. They don't need to kill you in battle. They just need to let your war die by 1,000 cuts. Robb's knuckles whitened around the map he held. Then we give them blood. We ride east. Hit their supply lines. Make them bleed instead. Brynden looked at him carefully. And leave the Riverlands exposed? I'd rather strike than sit here and rot. But even as he said it, he felt the tremble in his voice. The war was slipping out of his control, and he knew it. That night, Talisa finally spoke again. I dreamed of Winterfell last night, she said softly, brushing her damp hair behind her ear. Snow falling. Arya chasing wolves in the courtyard. Your mother laughing. Robb smiled faintly. I remember that laugh. She was strong. She had to be. She had 5 Starks to raise. Talisa hesitated. She would have traded Jaime. Robb looked at her, but didn't argue. Because he knew it was true. She would have done anything, Talisa continued. Even if it meant risking the war. Because her children were worth more than honor. Robb turned away. I'm not my mother. No, she said. You're your father. And that's what's killing you. He didn't respond. But those words stayed with him all night. By dawn, another raven arrived. This time, it carried a letter with no sigil. No name. Just a message written in a shaky hand. Arya is alive. Spotted near the Trident. In the company of a hound. Robb read the letter 5 times. His heart pounded. Alive. Arya. Alive. He showed it to no one, not even Talisa. If it was a trap, he wouldn't risk it. But hope was a dangerous thing. And now it pulsed in his chest like wildfire. He summoned a handful of scouts. Quiet, trusted men. Find her, he ordered. If she lives, bring her home. They rode out before noon. Disguised. Silent. No banners. Just shadows in the rain. But even hope came with a price. Because as they rode east, Roose Bolton watched from his tent, silent as ever, while his squire cleaned his armor. The pale boy, Ramsay, looked up and smirked. Shall I prepare your letter for the Queen Mother? Bolton nodded once. Tell her, cracks are widening. And in King's Landing, Cersei smiled as she poured herself more wine. The wolf bleeds, she whispered. Let him bleed longer. The camp moved like a wounded animal, dragging itself forward as if survival were a curse rather than a goal. Men mumbled beneath their breath, old loyalties rusting in the damp of doubt. Banners still flew, but they fluttered with less pride now, more like habit than honor. Robb sat in the war tent, hunched over the letter about Arya. The ink had smudged slightly from the rain, but the words burned clear in his mind. Alive. Near the trident. With the hound. He hadn't slept. The fire inside him, for once, wasn't rage. It was something more dangerous, hope. Arya, his little sister who used to throw snowballs and sneak meat from the kitchens. The wild child who never bowed, never cried, never cared about being a lady. Alive. But then came the question that twisted in his chest like a knife: if I had traded Jaime, would she already be home? Before he could sink deeper into that thought, Ser Brynden Tully entered with a grim face and a wet cloak. "We've got movement," he said. Phrase. 200 men. Setting up along the Green Fork. No banners raised. Robb stood. "They're preparing for something." "They're preparing for you," Brynden said flatly. "Walder Frey's insult runs deeper than we thought. If he's bringing men out now, he's not looking for words. He's looking for a reckoning." Robb turned toward the map. The Riverlands were collapsing into chaos. Lannister patrols were tightening their hold, and his northern host had been hollowed out by infighting and distrust. He needed allies. And he had none left. "I should have kept the Frey deal," he muttered. Brynden narrowed his eyes. "No. You should have sent Jaime. Your sisters might have bought you peace." Robb looked at him, surprised. The Blackfish had always supported him, always stood behind his decisions, even the painful ones. But now, even he was cracking. "I thought you believed in honor." "I do," Brynden said quietly. "But honor doesn't raise daughters from the dead. And it doesn't feed armies." That evening, Talisa brought in food he didn't eat. She sat beside him without speaking, her hands resting on her stomach. She had grown paler in recent weeks. The stress, the fear, and now the silence between them. He finally looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said. "For all of it." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We're past apologies, Robb. The war doesn't care who you love or what you regret. It just keeps eating." He reached out, placing his hand over hers. There was a moment of stillness, rare, beautiful, but short-lived. Because the next morning, 3 of his scouts returned from the Trident. Without Arya. Without the hound. "She's gone," the leader said, breathless from the ride. Locals saw them, yes, a girl matching her look, with a tall man, half-burned face. But they vanished west. No trail. No clue where they went. Robb said nothing. Just nodded and walked away, fists clenched. The fire of hope that had lit up his chest just a day ago, snuffed out again. Talisa watched from a distance. She wanted to go to him, hold him, pull him back from the abyss she saw forming in his eyes. But something stopped her. Maybe fear. Maybe the knowledge that even she couldn't reach him anymore. That night, Roose Bolton returned to the king's tent. "My men have sighted Lannister movement near the neck," he reported calmly. "I suggest we march to Moat Cailin. Take back our way home before they cut us off completely." Robb looked up. "Home." Bolton's voice was smooth. "The North, Your Grace. We've bled for it. We should consider preserving it. What's left of it." Robb narrowed his eyes. "You mean retreat?" "I mean survival," Bolton said. "You've fought well. Bravely. But perhaps the war is lost. We could secure Winterfell again. Restore order. Rebuild." Robb stood, voice rising. "And leave my sisters in King's Landing? Abandon our oaths? What would my father say to that?" Roose Bolton's eyes didn't flinch. "Your father is dead." The silence that followed was loud enough to make Grey Wind rise and growl. Bolton bowed slightly. "As you will, Your Grace." He left without waiting for permission. And behind him, Robb Stark, king in the north, the young wolf, the boy who'd once been cheered in every hall from White Harbor to Deepwood Motte, stood alone again. Not a king. Just a brother. A brother who couldn't save his sisters. And in the dead of night, far away in a cold stone hall, Arya Stark carved a line into a wooden wall with a stolen knife. A list. A reminder. "The king who let me rot." She whispered his name and added it to the others. Rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. The camp had turned into a muddy graveyard of dreams. Swords rusted quicker. Horses refused to march. And the men had begun to break. Not with rebellion, not with open mutiny. No, worse than that, they broke with silence. With empty stares. With the kind of stillness that came when hope had left their bones. Robb Stark walked through his army like a ghost among the dead. No one bowed anymore. They didn't defy him, they simply stopped seeing him as a king. Each footstep through the wet ground pulled harder, as if the north itself was trying to drag him back to where he came from, as if Winterfell's buried dead whispered, "Enough. Let go." But Robb didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Then came the raven. Black wings, blacker words. A letter marked by a red wax seal, House Fry. It was brief. "We invite His Grace to the Twins. A feast. A reconciliation. A future. No threats. No warnings. No venom. Just honey." And it was that exact sweetness that made Robb's blood run cold. "Walder Frey wants us under his roof," Brynden Tully muttered, reading it over Robb's shoulder. "You insulted his pride, and now he wants to toast in your name. Does that sound like forgiveness?" Roose Bolton stood at a distance, arms crossed, silent. Robb looked up. "If I refuse, he declares open war." Brynden didn't flinch. Better a known enemy than a smiling one. But Robb turned to Talisa, who stood nearby, hands folded over her growing belly. Her eyes searched his. "We need him," Robb said softly. "The Riverlands are bleeding. The north is isolated. We need the Freys." Talisa whispered, "You don't need them, you need your sisters." He looked away. The wound still fresh, her words always sharper than swords. That night, he gathered his war council. Roose Bolton sat quiet again, but this time he spoke just once. "I will ride ahead to the Twins," he offered. "Prepare the men. Soften Lord Walder's pride before you arrive." Robb hesitated, then nodded. "Do it." He should have known. He should have seen it. But when hope becomes rare, even poison tastes like water. As Bolton's horse vanished into the night, grey wind howled once, a long, mournful sound that sent chills through every man awake. Talisa clutched her stomach. The wind changed. The twins stood tall and cold like two bony hands across the river. As Robb, Talisa, and his remaining men rode toward the gates, music echoed from inside. Flutes. Laughter. Drums. Almost festive. Too festive. Lord Walder stood waiting at the entrance, lips curled into a wrinkled smile that never reached his eyes. "King Robb," he greeted, with mock courtesy. "Welcome. We've prepared a special seat for your queen." Robb forced a nod. "Thank you, Lord Walder. I hope tonight brings peace between our houses." "Oh, it will," Frey smirked. "One way or another." Talisa's hand tightened in his. She didn't say a word, but he felt her fear. It poured from her skin like sweat. Inside, the hall was warm. Too warm. Fires blazed on every wall. The air thick with roasted meats and spilled ale. But something was off. The music was offbeat. Too fast. Too loud. And the doors, they closed behind them too quickly. Too quietly. When Lord Fry stood to make his toast, Robb raised his goblet out of duty, not trust. And when the music stopped, it was like the world had gone mute. Then came the first scream. Talisa's. It tore through the hall like a blade. Blood bloomed across her stomach, soaking through silk. Robb turned, stunned, as knives flashed from sleeves, and crossbows were raised from balconies. The Freys smiled as they murdered. Men who had marched with Robb for 3 years fell without raising their swords. His bannermen. His friends. Grey Wind's howl echoed from outside, then stopped. Robb screamed, lunging toward Talisa, but too late. Her eyes had gone still, her hand still gripping his as her blood spilled across the cold stone. He was on his knees when Roose Bolton walked up behind him, armor clean, expression unreadable. "This is the price of pride," Bolton said quietly. Robb turned his head, eyes full of fire. "You." Before he could finish, Bolton stabbed him clean through the heart. "The Lannisters send their regards." And just like that, the young wolf fell. The North had no king now. Only dead wolves. And far away, in the dark of King's Landing, Sansa dropped her cup during dinner. She didn't know why. But in her bones, she felt something break. Something she would never be able to fix. Blood dried slower on stone. The warmth of it faded, but the stains remained, permanent reminders of trust betrayed and pride punished. The great hall of the twins, once echoing with false music and forced laughter, now stood silent except for the soft drip, drip, drip of death. Robb Stark lay still. His eyes wide open, staring at nothing. His crown was gone, his sword discarded, his body a broken memory of a king who had once shaken the South with fear. Talisa lay beside him, lifeless, the last warmth of love bled from her stomach into the cracks of the Fry floor. They didn't bury them. No graves. No rites. Instead, the Freys mocked them. They sewed Grey Wind's head onto Robb's body, stitched with wire and cruelty. A wolf for a head. A crown of shame. They paraded the corpse on horseback around the courtyard, laughing, cheering, calling him, the king in the kennel. No one stopped them. Because no one could. The Red Wedding was not just a slaughter, it was a message. A war-ending blow wrapped in betrayal and sealed with wine and blood. And it worked. The North shattered. One by one, the banners of the great northern houses were burned or bent. The Karstarks, the Umbers, even the Manderleys, they either swore loyalty to the Iron Throne or retreated into the snows, broken, faithless. Roose Bolton was named Warden of the North, seated in Winterfell with a crown soaked in treachery. By his side stood a twisted, grinning shadow of a man, Ramsay Snow. Bastard by name, butcher by choice. Letters were sent to King's Landing, to Cersei Lannister, confirming Robb Stark's death. Cersei read it with a smile, swirling her wine slowly. "So ends the Stark rebellion," she whispered. "So ends the boy who thought honor would save him." But not everyone celebrated. In the cold walls of the Vale, little Lord Robin asked his mother, "Why did the wolf die?" Lisa Arryn, half-mad and clinging to her secrets, replied, "Because he thought lions would keep their word." In the Riverlands, Blackfish Brynden Tully escaped the massacre. He vanished into the forests, hunted but unbroken, vowing he would never bend the knee to a butcher in a stolen castle. And far across Westeros, in the ashes of the Brotherhood, Arya Stark heard whispers of her brother's death. She didn't cry. Not at first. She sat by a fire, quiet, watching the flames, until her lips parted and a name escaped, soft, sharp, and bitter. Walder Frey. She carved it into the wood with her blade. Then she whispered another. Roose Bolton. And another. Ramsay Snow. And then, quietly, with the deepest wound of all, Robb Stark. Not out of hatred, but because somewhere inside, she blamed him. For not coming. For not trading. For leaving her and Sansa behind while he played king in muddy fields. He'd let pride win over blood. And blood had answered. Sansa, in King's Landing, received the news a week later. They told her gently, or as gently as a queen could, when gloating, that her brother and his foreign wife had been slain by the Freys. That his army had been scattered. That the north belonged to the Boltons now. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She simply stood, shaking, and whispered, he could have ended this. He could have sent Jaime. Joffrey, ever the child tyrant, laughed. Well, he didn't. And now your family's a pile of corpses, Lady Wolf. That night, Sansa walked the halls of the Red Keep alone. Her feet led her to the God's Wood, the only place that still smelled like Winterfell. She knelt under the weirwood tree, tears hot on her cheeks. Why, Robb, she asked the silence. Why didn't you choose us? The tree did not answer. But the wind howled through the leaves, and for a moment, it almost sounded like wolves, crying, calling, dying. Years later. Stories still passed through taverns and keeps. Of a young king who could have won but chose honor over family. Of a boy who refused to bend, and in doing so, broke everything he loved. Children asked, why didn't he trade? And old men answered, because he thought the world would wait for him to be right. But the world doesn't wait. And it never forgives a king who forgets the cost of war is often paid by those he leaves behind. Robb Stark's name faded from banners, from coins, from songs. But not from scars. Not from Arya's list. Not from Sansa's silence. And not from the north, where the snow still remembers the howl of the last true wolf.